on the Civil Affairs Association website. And on the registration page, you can download them to read them fully. I'm not going to read the bios fully. First of all, we are extremely fortunate today to have a true national treasure, and I say this with all humility, for the United States, a civil affairs officer, and once CA, always CA, right, Hugh? General Hugh Van Roosen, Major General Hugh Van Roosen, serves as the Deputy Military Advisor of the United Nations. For those of you who don't know what that means, he's the #2 guy in uniform in the United Nations. Kind of like the Vice Chief of Staff, Vice Chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. So we're extremely privileged to have Hugh on board. And then from on the other side, so Hugh and I are kind of in the New York time zone. Everyone else is in the Central European time zone. Well, no, we have Canada. That's right. We have Ottawa. So Ottawa's what? You're an hour behind us. You're in the Chicago time. 1 hour earlier, I think. So on the other side of the pond, we have Lieutenant Colonel Stefan Jülich, who is the branch chief of concepts, interoperability, and capabilities for the NATO Civic Center of Excellence in Den Haag in the Netherlands. And we've been managing to grow a very good relationship with them. Also joining us from the UK is Lieutenant, or should I say Lieutenant Colonel, Dave Allen, who works in the stabilization part of the warfare branch of the Land Warfare Center of the United Kingdom. And they've been doing some really fascinating stuff that I think we could all benefit from having shared. And likewise, from a more ground perspective, Lieutenant Colonel Carolyn Lamar, who is the commanding officer of the Influence Activities Task Force. That name for a second. Actually got a name for this in Canada. In the Department of National Defense in Canada. And of course, with her is Major Charles Nato, who works also the Influence Activities Task Force in Canada. And they've been doing some real groundbreaking work in kind of the CIMIC PSYOPs, information operation integration, through their very good experience in Afghanistan and elsewhere. They've also been quite active in Africa. In this area, the north part of Africa, the Trans-Sahel. So they've got a lot to talk about. So I'm going to ask each one of them to give a little briefing, kind of give us an update, let us know what's important. If there are any documents that they have, that they reference, I'm going to ask them to throw the link for that document in the chat side so that people can download them. And after this, we'll make sure that we also have the documents and any briefings that they may have loaded on the website so people can go back. This is, of course, being recorded, and the video itself will be posted probably in a week or two. And for those of us who want to go back to it for any reason. So without any further ado, we go to Major General Van Roosen in New York. Over to you, Hugh.
Thank you very much, Chris. I'm delighted to be joining this webinar on allied and multinational perspectives on civil military engagement and influence. I made just a few bullet points so that I can speak to those, and I will try to only take a few minutes. So again, in way of explanation, as Chris said, I'm the Deputy Military Advisor at the Office of Military Affairs in the Department of Peace Operations at the Secretariat, the UN headquarters in New York. What that means is we are a small group of 134 seconded officers and a small civilian staff responsible for essentially OPCON and management of approximately 76,000 troops from 120 member states that are deployed worldwide in 22 missions currently. We have a few missions that are expected to close in the short to midterm, and we have a couple of missions that are expected to open in the short to midterm. Those 76,000 troops are engaged in combat every day, and all while dealing with COVID-19. So it makes for a really interesting process to try to do the headquarters management and just the movement. We have to move over 200,000 people per year during COVID-19, and that alone is enough to keep quite a lot of people very busy. So to get to the point of our meeting today, those perspectives on civil military engagement and influence, I'll talk about just a few things. The first is there's been a gradual change in the United Nations doctrine, moving from CIMIC to the term engagement. And we are doing that gently. We're putting the terms together in our doctrine, so you'll hear engagement / CIMIC referred to. We still have staff sections that are CIMIC staff sections, although we are converting those to CIMIC engagement / engagement. The intent here is to bring this forward in our doctrinal thinking. Now, what we use, and this is one of the documents that Chris was talking about, we have a policy from 2010, which is civil military coordination in UN integrated peacekeeping. So that's a UN policy. That's our highest level of doctrine. It goes from doctrine through SOPs, those standard operating procedures, to guidelines and down to handbooks and manuals. So that policy it's 10 years old. It's about 15 pages long, and it's probably 10 pages longer than it should be. Most of our policies should be very short documents that are very focused on high-level decisions about, the UN will do this in this way, because the other doctrine will flow from that. So we are in the midst of revising that policy now, and my staff has gone from this 15-page document to one that's about 30 pages long. And it has not hit my desk yet, but I've already warned our policy and doctrine chief that the intent will be to slash that down to just a few pages and take the rest of that information and put it into a manual. So what we're looking to do is revise this CIMIC policy, make it much cleaner and shorter, and then take the bulk of how to do that and put that into a CIMIC manual, which will include, everything from, how you interact with populations and others in the humanitarian arena, to how to utilize quick impact project or QUIP funding that the United Nations has as well. So all of that should be captured in this. And I've been at the UN now for 3.5 years, or nearly 3.5 years, so my time is limited, but I want to push as hard as I can to get this done before we see me sail off into the sunset. So another document that I think is important to this is as Chris mentioned, it's the UN Infantry Battalion Manual that was published in January of this year. And in that, we put an engagement / CIMIC section. And it talks about engagement being defined as the interaction of a UN infantry battalion with a population and other government and non-governmental actors within an area of operations to improve cooperation, reporting, and deconflict military activities with those of other actors. So just briefly, that's what we're talking about. So that, for us, the reason that we put this in an infantry manual is because 76% of the 76,000 troops that we have are infantry. So it's most of the units that we have are are of the infantry type. So we've created these engagement platoons that, depending on the type of infantry battalion, whether it's mechanized, motorized, or light, whether it has 3 or 4 companies, we have engagement teams of 4 people each. 4 of those in a 3-company battalion, 5 of them in a 4-company battalion. The requirement that we have is that we have made those engagement platoons at least 50% female, at least. Some will do more, some will struggle to meet the 50% requirement. We do this for a couple of reasons. One is we believe that having different genders gives us a wider ability to interact successfully with our populations that we're working amongst. But also, we have the Secretary General's gender parity strategy. And that strategy talks about increasing the number of women across the United Nations. And much of that has been quite successful. In certain areas, we have not. So what we at the headquarters in the Office of Military Affairs can do is we can determine how many military staff officers or military experts on mission will be female. And so we have been working on that number steadily for the last 4 years, and we have gone from a very low number up to our target goal in 2020. We've already exceeded 17%, and we're increasing 1% per year in this body of personnel because we can. Where we have more trouble is influencing our member states that provide military units to bring up the percentage of women in those organizations. So if you have an infantry battalion, it is not unusual to see very low numbers of women assigned, and only in certain places. One of our largest member states has met the staff officer and military expert on missions number of 17% this year, but their number for women in their contingents is 1.1%. So that's a struggle that we continue to have, and we're not quite at the policy level yet where we are going to try to force the issue with member states that are providing these units, simply because of the difficulty in obtaining, enough. We have nearly 100 infantry battalions and companies deployed right now, but if we set the rules such that there's a particular quota with that, we may find ourselves in some difficulty with force generation. All right, just on that side. So the last couple of points I want to talk about is another document that we are drafting right now is an engagement platoon handbook. In U.S. doctrine, that would be a civil affairs manual. In NATO doctrine, that would be a CIMIC discussion. For us, this will be an engagement platoon handbook that will get into the specific details about how these 4-person engagement teams are to be utilized as they do their work. We put the cart before the horse, as we say, and we actually established a number of engagement platoons and teams in our missions already, but we did it without doctrine. So we've left it completely up to member states to do whatever they felt best in this area. And frankly, they need some help with, just like we did with the infantry battalion manual, they truly need an engagement platoon handbook so that they can base training and preparation on that. So another thing that we've done in the last couple of years is to do a very specific definition of tasks for all of our military skills and attach standards to those as well. And so what that means is now we can evaluate, for instance, an infantry battalion has 16 tasks, and we can evaluate those tasks before the unit deploys, and we can evaluate it when it is deployed. And we've set up systems to do that that are turning out to be quite successful. And thankfully, member states have allowed us to do that. The last point I wanted to talk to in my time is regarding influence slash strategic communications slash information operations slash psychological operations, or whatever you want to call the idea of communicating ideas to particular audiences for a particular purpose. The UN is very cautious. Just 2 years ago, we took on the task of adding military intelligence to our doctrine. And in order to do that, we had to rename it as peacekeeping military intelligence and make it extremely clear what that can and cannot do. And part of military intelligence, peacekeeping military intelligence for us, is the collection of information, and we utilize engagement platoons for that purpose as well. And that will be outlined in the engagement platoon handbook when that comes out. Well, so we have a long way to go in the concept of, I'll call it strategic communications. That seems to be the most comfortable term at the UN currently. And we've partnered with a couple of different stakeholders in this at the headquarters to start the process of designing a capability. Right now, we're suggesting to the General Assembly and the Fifth Committee that we restructure our office to include a strategic communications capability within the headquarters. Some of our missions have already gone ahead without any doctrine and created their own strategic communications capability. We see that in Mali. We see it a little bit in the Central African Republic and the Congo, but we have not provided the doctrine to underpin our force commanders' efforts to get after this root problem. The Central African Republic, as an example, is one of the most challenging places to deal with, if you will, propaganda that is put out by various actors. And it's been a major challenge for the mission and for the force in that particular mission. So we have recognized that we need the doctrine, we need the training structure for our staffs. And I'll finish with one of the other projects we are nearing completion on is designing the doctrine that will allow us to define exactly what a staff looks like, what their tasks are, and how we will evaluate those headquarters as well. So our intent is to do evaluations of headquarters, the force, our sector commands, our brigade commands, all the way down to battalion level or separate companies. We are in the process of finalizing what that looks like, and what that will give us is a document that will tell a force commander or a sector commander exactly how their staff is supposed to be functioning. And we think that this will significantly improve another issue that or another doctrinal item we added, which is a United Nations military decision-making process. So all of this doctrinal overlay, which is very important to me at the headquarters, my responsibility is operational oversight, and I can't do that unless there's a way to measure performance against existing doctrine. It's not enough for us, it hasn't been enough for us to rely on just national doctrine. We have to have UN doctrine that explains to our member states what is expected of a particular military skill while it's being applied in a UN mission. All right, hopefully that gives some good food for thought, and I'll stop there. Chris, back over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Hugh, for that review. I've been jotting down lots of notes, so I'm certainly going to have some questions for you later. I know the others will. This is fascinating. It's really interesting stuff. But hold your questions, at least if you will, put your questions in the Q&A box so we can have them queued up. We're going to go around now to Stefan and ask him to give us the NATO perspective on kind of the fusion between CIMIC and to want of a better term, the strategic communications or the influence part. Let's see what's going on in Europe. Over to you, Stefan.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you for having me here. I'm honored and pleased to be a panelist in this forum. First of all, let me stress that I'm not qualified and authorized to give an official NATO perspective. I will give you my personal perspective on NATO, and I hope that this is the right context to put it in. So the challenges for NATO, for me currently, are that the strengths that you have mentioned in your opening remarks, that we are an alliance of values. The cohesion within the alliance depends very much on the perceived threat level. And as far as I can currently see that the threat level coming from that continuum of competition, rather than having conventional war directly in your front yard, is different. So the countries that have a border to the east, they have a very imminent perception of the threat. And if you go further south and further west, that differs a bit. And so the cohesion of the alliance is, I would say, currently not at its peak, and that results also in the fact that all the decision-making processes, the policies that are developed, can be put on hold because it is all hampered by one or two nations that wouldn't agree to it, and so there is slow progress on the adaptation required from the post-World War II setup to the non-Article 5 crisis response operations like in the Balkans and Afghanistan, and now back to deterrence and defense, but on a level where our competitors and opponents don't pose an obvious conventional threat on us, but challenge us below the threshold of an international crisis or even an armed conflict or war. And that's exactly the issue, that at the current status, peacetime as it's perceived by many of our allies, they struggle to share sensitive information, especially when it comes to vulnerabilities. We can see that in the hesitation of several members to share the data about their status on the baseline requirements, the 7 baseline requirements for resilience, where the allies have committed to report to NATO on their status of affairs when it comes to the most important indicators of civil preparedness. The second thing is NATO doctrine has to adapt, but as I already mentioned, it's an alliance of 30 sovereign nations. It takes time. So we are currently in the process, CIMIC-wise, to adapt the doctrine, starting on the policy level. So the MC 411-2 was supposed to be reviewed, assessing the situation, knowing that at least one of our allies wouldn't agree to a reviewed version. We mitigated that by initiating an interim update of the document. It's a difference in the process because it doesn't need an approval on all nations level. So The interim update of the CIMIC and CMI policy has been initiated, and we are member of the writing team together with Shape J9 and people from NATO headquarters. We are contributing to this. This is the mother document for our allied joint publication 319, CIMIC and CMI. We have issued the latest version in November 18, so relatively new, but at the moment when the policy will be validated in 21, then we start already again the review of our CIMIC doctrine as well. So there's progress on it, but it's a slow turning wheel on that. The doctrine has to make that adaptation as well, because most of our doctrine currently is focused on operations. So we are talking about a crisis where we have armed forces engaging, and we have to realize that we will very often not come to that threshold, but our doctrine and our measures to take have to be able to be applied in this continuum of competition at the threshold where we currently move. The NATO is from the transformational side of the pond. So Allied Command Transformation in Norfolk is currently writing the NATO warfighting capstone concept, which is a document that will look out in a 20 years horizon. So define NATO warfare for the next 20 years. In that document, we have the influence via the Center of Excellence channel, and we ensure that the mindset of a comprehensive, or I think as you call it, a whole of government approach with a close civil-military cooperation, even better integration, will also be reflected in that document. And on the operational part, the latest strategic document that was released was the concept for the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. This is warfare today with an outlook on 5 years. And here we had close cooperation with Shape J9, so the CIMICers on the strategic level, on the operational side of the NATO house, to reflect the CIMIC perspectives here. That's it from the doctrinal aspect. Now I want to say something about the capability aspect of CIMIC. From our perspective, CIMIC is less an influencer that has a target audience and tries to influence the target audience to reach specific effects. But we see the CIMIC rather being a sensor, a coordinator, and an analyst. Because if the CIMIC is able to analyze and assess the civil environment and contribute with a value-adding product like this assessment of this very, very complex topic with a relatively low number of CIMICers and with a low capacity compared to other analysts, if we compare it to J2, then the CIMICR is relevant in the decision-making process and adds value to the commander in every headquarter. And this is why we are together with Shape J9 have a priority on the project of an analysis and assessment concept development, where we are looking on a time window. End of 21, we want to have the concept ready, and then we want to translate that into doctrine and into training and education within another year. So this is where we are working on from a capability development. From an interoperability side, Chris, you're well aware of our synchronization project with Civil Affairs. We have announced that in last year's symposium in Tampa. We were hampered a bit by COVID because our physical execution of our courses in the US were both postponed from summer 20 to spring, or to be determined maybe summer 21. Nevertheless, we continue to develop and improve a Euro-NATO CIMIC awareness course for US civil affairs. So with the primary target audience is civil affairs units that are to be deployed to Europe in order to increase their understanding of the CIMIC concept in Euro-NATO. In a second line of effort in our synchronization project is the academia. So we plan to edit an academic book that covers that topic, from civil-military cooperation to civil-military interoperability, even to the deepest form, to civil-military integration. And we want to have contributions from the European side as well as from the US side. So far we are in touch with Professor Thomas Matjok, and we will reach out to the academic side on the US side of the Atlantic to get valuable contribution on that. I can give you some examples or some stories why I think it is really necessary and adding value if we exchange our views to better understand the differences in the mandates and to see the better setup of civil affairs and CIMIC. And I want to refer to reports that I have heard from US civil affairs country team who has been in Hungary, another one who has been in Norway, and some experience that was shared by a colleague who was posted in the Estonian NATO force integration unit, working closely together with an enhanced forward presence element from Great Britain in Estonia. And the common thing to communicate here for me is we really have to be aware that we are moving on sensitive ground when we are deploying within the alliance, within peacetime, to a sovereign nation, and we start to engage with the population. Let me give you an example that stuck to my mind. I heard that the US country team in Hungary was monitoring the election campaign and tried to influence the population to elect the candidate that was the favorite candidate from the US perspective, which was for me as a European NATO CIMICO, an approach that I couldn't imagine, that if you act in an allied country or in a sovereign country, that you try to influence the population to vote, because your ally is the current government of that country, and therefore here I think we really have sensitive topics that we really need to address and to discuss in advance. This is quite a similar story when the British CIMICOs were acting in Estonia. At the beginning, they were portraying the message that Great Britain is a great ally and will contribute to keep Estonia free. And in a further step of their deployment, they realized it is better to have a common NATO message of a strong alliance rather than a binational agreement or a binational alliance. And this is really something where we can get better, even on our military level. We can't change policy and politics, but we can change and we can change our behavior and our engagement on the ground, and we can change the direction and guidance that we give to the subordinate units. We can change the content of our training and education that we set up and provide for the CIMICOs. So with that, I would give it back to you, and I'm looking forward to the question and answers.
Stefan, danke schön. Thank you so much for that great review. Hopefully, and again, I would emphasize, we would love to see an article in the Eunomia Journal on exactly what you talked about, so that we can get the situational awareness up in the civil affairs community, and everybody is invited to contribute to the Eunomia Journal to give us a much greater shared sense of situational awareness of what everybody else is doing, kind of like flank coordination. So with that, let's go from Den Haag to Ottawa, if I'm not mistaken, right? You can unmute.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Good morning, sir. You surprised me. I thought I was after the next one.
You're right, but well, okay. Dave, are you ready to give your pitch, or?
I am too.
Okay.
So I can. It's up to you.
Okay, so I stand corrected. Let's stay with the batting order as we have it lined up here. I don't know if batting order is a cricket term, but I know it's a baseball term. And so my apologies. So let me go over from Ottawa. Ottawa, please stand by. Okay. And let's go over to the UK.
Hopefully the screens come up there. Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to take up very much time, because actually we want to get into the question side of it. Really, from the UK's perspective, the current situation, which Chris, you referred to, is very much back to the future. This is a return to what we're starting to do is codify the reality as it has always been. This is not new concepts in many ways, but actually what we're doing is a restructuring the way we think about it. And very much the back to the future theme, with a picture of the partner force operations down the bottom with the armored cars that were supporting the Arab revolt in 1917 with Lawrence of Arabia. So actually partner force operations are, have been a long feature throughout military history, actually. So this sort of engagement below the threshold of major armed violence is not new. That's almost been the norm. Is almost the large-scale combat operations have been the aberrations. And to address that and to structure our thinking is clearly we're aware of the US global operating model, but sort of very recently, in fact, last week, our Chief of Defence Staff sort of structured strategically the UK's thinking on it. And that was in the integrated operating concept. Which essentially what it does is it's recognizing now that actually our adversaries aim to win without fighting, because actually engaging in major combat operations is, I think Desert Storm and Iraqi Freedom showed that probably is they're very unlikely to win. So actually it's far more effective at a lower cost if you haven't got constraints to actually attack the willpower and decision making that actually will prompt a response from the Western allies, whether that's NATO or whether it's individual countries. And so we have this idea where information and ambiguity are actually the key weapons below the threshold. And our adversaries use that to actually prevent us detecting what they're doing and undermining our ability to deter what they're doing, and so actually preventing us responding. And part of our response to that is the integrated operating concept. And essentially what that looks to do is, rather than have this idea that you were in peacetime and in wartime, we operate and fight. So essentially we operate all the time. Sometimes you may have to fight, but we operate in either by protecting, engaging, or constraining. And that can involve deterrence, that can involve capacity building, that can involve a whole host of capabilities. But the key thing is it's about competing below the threshold of armed conflict. And it's not a one-off concept. It's not a campaign, it's a campaigning mindset. So in a sense, it's getting away from this idea that you will have at the end of 6 months a decisive act. It won't work that way. It's be continuum. You gain temporary advantage, but actually you could lose that advantage and you have to regain it. And so potentially we're protecting, engaging, constraining, very occasionally fighting, but we are moving up and down that continuum constantly. So rather than holding forces at contingency, the just in case, they are operating even when they're training. So when we deploy on an exercise, that contributes to deterrence. It also contributes to engagement. And one of the key things in that is the partners and allies. And building those relationships is absolutely essential. And this is where civil affairs type capabilities. The UK, we call that outreach. And that covers a whole host of different sort of activities. But essentially, it is about engagement to understand the nature of what we're seeing, because artificial intelligence and big data will take you so far, but you've got to have the human understanding as well. And sometimes you can only get that with the face-to-face engagement, person to person, to get that real deep visceral understanding. So a key part of outreach is actually understanding what we're looking at. And that becomes very important when you're talking about thresholds between response detection. So there's a key role there for outreach in this backwards and forwards between protect, engage, constrain, and fight. And if you understand the context and what's going on, it could be the answer's not to escalate, it could be to de-escalate. So the critical role of outreach is providing that human understanding of, so that we can make better decisions, not clouded by fake news, disinformation, and things like that. So it's trying to cut through that. And it's to help build resilience of ourselves through that understanding, but also help build the resilience of our allies, so they're not subject to that same sort of influence as well. And if necessary, that sort of outreach and engagement can help us carry out indirect action, help our partners and enable our partners to do things that actually would be inappropriate for us to do, because it could be escalatory, whereas actually through a partner, it might be de-escalatory, or actually it might be, rather than go to confrontation, cooperation is sometimes the right answer. But what you need is a good understanding of what is going on at the time to do that. So really, I just wanted to give you, and the links should be there. I sent that across already. Essentially outlines what the IOPSI is, but instead of the contact layer, blunt layer, surge layer, is we have protect, engage, constrain, fight if necessary, but actually the engage is critical to help constrain. So outreach, civil affairs, CIMIC, whichever you want to call it, is that person-to-person interaction to build understanding is seen as absolutely critical in maintaining the status quo, where possible, below the level of armed conflict. So, I mean, that's what we're aspiring to do. We don't want to go to armed conflict, but actually a lot of the time is our adversaries deliberately obscuring those thresholds. So CIMIC, civil affairs, are essential to providing that understanding and engagement. So we say engagement, outreach is actually a force multiplier at the strategic level. It's not just a tactical activity, it's absolutely essential to our security. And I think that's all I'll do, and I'll give Ottawa a chance, and then we can get into some questions.
Over to Ottawa.
You're muted.
We're on mute. Do you hear me? Okay. I don't know if you heard everything, but it wasn't that important. Okay. I was just saying that I'm the commanding officer of the Influence Activities Task Force. We're located actually in Kingston. I keep saying Ottawa. I was not going to say it, but we are. It's close by. We're the only full-time organization that's focused on those things, influence activities. I'm going to quickly address the organization we belong to, how we use CIMIC in influence activities. I'm trying to go really fast, and when I do, I speak too fast, so I apologize in advance. So where we fit in, to begin with, my organization has purpose. First, we're responsible for force generating specialists in information operations, specifically influence activities. In Canada, that mainly means PSYOPs and CIMIC sort of together. Based on lesson learned, especially from our operations in Afghanistan, we started to make them really closer. Also, as a center of excellence, my staff writes lesson learned, doctrine, he represents us with our allies. So today I'm here as the deputy director, not as the commanding officer of a level 4 unit. Having both purposes allows us to use our people who come back from operations and integrate right away the lesson learned into the capabilities. My officer responsible for that cell, for the lesson, for the Functional Center of Excellence this year is Major Charles Nato, who will be talking right after me. And he's gonna give a more practical example on how we do this. So to come back to the organization and the concept, set up 10 years ago, my unit is in a process of changing names. We're gonna transition from being a task force to a permanent unit, which is gonna be called a battalion, but it's a little smaller than a battalion. We belong to the Canadian Combat Support Brigade, which provides enabling capabilities anywhere between the battle group level to the division level. So we're a little different than everything else in Canada, sort of like 77 Brigade in the UK. So the IETF is specifically tasked with providing CIMIC and PSYOPs formed elements and InfoOps individuals reinforcement on high readiness. Following an initial deployment, which we call a Roto Zero, I think that's coming to all, I'm not sure. Operators for sustained deployments will be provided, however, by the reserve because we're not big enough to sustain. Those reserve units are all spread across Canada. They're at the company level, and they all consist of a platoon of PSYOPs and a platoon of CIMIC. This concept is meant to be modular, though, meaning that depending on a joint statement of requirement, which is part of the mission analysis when we go to a new deployment, the construct could be altered. For example, when we deployed in Haiti in 2010 after the earthquake, we had only one detachment of PSYOPs, but we had many CIMIC detachments. In this case, it might sound weird to send PSYOPs in HA, but the PSYOPs debt was used to support the messaging, reassuring the population, etc., and support the humanitarian aid efforts. So another possibility, for example, in a combat deployment above a battle group level, the company can grow. So we're not strict with the company itself. So for example, in Afghanistan, when we got out of the combat mission, we had a full company of PSYOPs and a full company of CIMIC, which was really, really big to support the, I'm not using numbers because of the platform we're on. That's why I use terms that are vague, like big, instead of numbers. So to support the battle group that we had in Afghanistan. So while we use influence activities as a concept, it's important to mention that we didn't reject like PSYOPs alone or CIMIC. There's still two different capabilities, and we don't break them below the detachment level. But we have been able to do like a combined patrol with PSYOPs and CIMIC. That was tried the first time, I believe, in Afghanistan also. We still consider them as two capabilities. The usefulness, though, of putting IA together is meant to create synergy between our elements. We also do the same thing. We also want to do the same thing with all the operations. So under the coordinate function information operations, we try to link with other information-related capabilities, for example, EW, etc., and more so with the operations themselves. So my concern in the past has been using IRCs, information-related capabilities, alone and using them as a silo. I've seen that often on different deployments. That's the big thing we're trying to avoid, and we are forcing our people to actually cross-train and understand each other so we're better specialists. So those silos, the impact that I worry about is not considering second and third order effect properly. So that's why the integration is really important, and it has to be done with the effect cell, for example, in the battle group. So that was really quick, an overview of the presentation because we're trying to get to the questions at the end. So I'm going to ask Major Nato to give us a practical example of our use of CIMIC in our humanitarian aid deployment before we're going to address what we're still working on to develop. So sorry, I spoke really fast.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Morning, everybody. I'm Major Nato. We're trying to do some social distancing here, so I apologize for the delay here. Thank you very much for the invitation to present here on this panel. Today, I've chosen to discuss the concept of employment of CIMIC element in support of the Disaster Assistance Response Team, the DART. That's what I'll call the DART. As you will discover, there are a lot of parallels between the DART and the US HADR. Of note, the concept of employment I'm about to discuss has been proved effective during the earthquake response in Nepal in 2015, as well as a typhoon response in the Philippines in 2013, for which the Canadian Armed Forces received high praise from the UN OCHA for what we call a modularized need-based deployment model. So I will put a lot of focus on this modularized model in this brief. The example and observation mentioned here are lesson learned and lesson identified for these two disaster relief operations. The DART as a case study here is interesting because it's the most likely short-term operational mandate of the Canadian Army CIMIC element. The team is on a 48 hours notice to move upon activation of the mission. Its current concept of ops and employment is the result of an ongoing effort from our part of integration to joint effects and to the operational planning process. So it's not merely an add-on capability. Also of note, the same concept of employment has been successfully validated during the MISO Combined Unit exercise in Virginia in October 2017. The aim of this training was to exercise civil affairs and PSYOPs partnering in an HADR environment. The concept of ops of the DART includes the rescue, relief, and recovery stages of a humanitarian emergency. The DART conducts operation for approximately 40 days, more or less, or until the effect of the disasters have stabilized. It will normally only deploy in a permissive environment. Even though the DART essentially conducts down-to-earth tactical tasks, the team is clearly of strategic significance for the government of Canada. The DART construct is a portfolio of response capabilities which can deploy partially, independently, or as part of larger organization. In designing appropriate task-tailored response that is scalable given the situation at hand, other assets could also be selected for deployment with the DART. In other words, it's not a one-size-fits-all concept. In order to mirror the modular and scalable nature of the DART, the composition of the CIMIC element remain also modular and scalable. For example, the ratio of analysts versus operators will change in order to meet or to adjust with the requirement of this specific mission. CIMIC elements are employed in small teams trained to coordinate, liaise, and develop, this is not new, a detailed picture of the civil environment in order to advise and enable the DART mission. As I'm about to discuss, the main difference and the significant difference between the traditional CIMIC and DART CIMIC is that the latter use means that usually belong to other information-related capabilities. This is made possible in part by the unique background of our CIMIC team to DART, being 100% cross-trained with both CIMIC and PSYOPs. Even though CIMIC elements support the DART in various ways, I would like to emphasize during this presentation on the information domain. As we are increasingly aware of in humanitarian disaster, people affected by the tragedy have more than physical needs. They also have urgent needs for information, and this is where we see a developing role for CIMIC. In the presence of factors such as international organizations, UN agencies, and NGOs, we start with the principle that humanitarian practitioners and organizations are better suited, better able to provide life-saving information and communicate with crisis-affected communities. However, in their early phase of the deployment, the CIMIC element will identify gaps in the communication and look for ways to fill them. Mission success, therefore, involves dynamic information exchange, planning, coordination, and negotiation, which are all activities that CIMIC element will aim to support. However, by relaying public information to partner NGOs and agencies, the local population, and by controlling the mean of the delivery, what DART CIMIC does is more than coordination and liaison, it is clearly influencing. DART CIMIC support NGOs and other partner agency information campaign through activities such as face-to-face engagement, for example, to identify their needs, humanitarian radio broadcasting using portable FM radio transmitter, what we call the radio in the box. So they're portable FM transmitters. Crowd control, also using loudspeakers, which are two tools that are in the CIMIC toolbox here in Canada. SMS surveying, I will mention that a bit later in the brief, and product testing. For example, in Nepal, CIMIC elements supported planning and assessment working group with communities broadcast group in Kathmandu. They also coordinated support of local radio, IO, NGOs, and community broadcaster, and also distributed hand-crank radio to facilitate the delivery of the humanitarian assistance in villages affected by the earthquake. Other ways used by CIMIC element to support civilian more traditionally is the need assessment, support to communicating with communities, the CWC program. Field coordination, obviously, with including a daily coordination with the UN OSOC and the clusters. Key leader engagement, support to intelligence, and support to public affairs with integral imagery, audio, and video tools. Because of the fast-paced deployment and the competitive environment in which DART is employed, activities conducted in phase 0, so before the point of crisis, in the gray zone here, are crucial to mission success. I think this is a conclusion that we all can come to. Yet, a lot remains to be done in terms of development in this field, and especially in remote sensing. But that's a challenge we are now addressing here in Canada with our CIMIC element on the DART. In order to maximize their readiness in phase 0, CIMIC element will, on a weekly basis, monitor portal and apps such as the virtual OSOC, which is the primary portal used by OCHA, and use other portals such as Humanitarian ID, Relief Web, and so on and so forth. Also, we'll conduct Horizon Scan, therefore contributing to the intelligence preparation of the operating environment, so the IPOE, by producing a weekly report on a short list of countries under surveillance for potential DART mission. Another emerging way to maximize deployment readiness is through social media analysis. Among other advantages of social media mining, it's enabled CIMIC element to start collecting real-time imagery and start building a baseline data of the affected area before the arrival of the troop on the ground. Currently, we're prudently testing social media analysis in crisis response in order to find ethical and moral ways to sense the affected population while also respecting privacy. Obviously, it's a challenge that is yet to be attained. So wrapping up this quick overview, it was fast and furious. I apologize for the speed. I will restate the four key takeaways that I've discussed in this 10 minutes or so. So future successful CIMIC deployment in a disaster relief context will be modularized and need-based, will be integrated to joint effects into the operational planning process. So it fits in what we call in Canada the effect-based approach to operation. It will identify gaps in communication and look forward to fill these gaps. And it will be cognizant and informed of the situation at hand on the ground before the deployment of the troop. Thank you very much for your attention, and ma'am, up to you.
Okay. Just to close with, I just wanted to say we've been less involved with CIMIC, not less involved, but with limited resources. We've put a lot of efforts and PSYOPs in the last years, and we're kind of coming back with the program and to get our involvement more, put more involvement with both NATO and other coalition efforts with regards to CIMIC. So I'm really looking forward to participate. I was listening to General Van Rosen talking about Africa. We both have UN deployments, and my DCO is coming back from Mali as the InfoOps officer. We would love to contribute with the things we've learned over there, because I've seen interesting things, as you can, yes, absolutely. So that's it for us. We're looking for to discuss with you on those.
Okay, terrific. We're going to open up now on the Q&A side, and let's see. We have some questions here that if I could ask Kyle, looking at the questions, be prepared to bring those people up, Dr. Black, Brian Crick, and Dr. Lucy Raleigh. I'm going to take my privilege as the facilitator to ask a few questions. So first, and especially with General Van Rosen and his discussion of NATO's, UN CIMIC and engagement capabilities. I would like to know if you could clarify in this emerging concept. It's a very interesting shift of focus, or a clarification of focus, I would say, not really so much a shift, but just a clarification and update of the CIMIC approach. Where in the concept do you think this idea of mission coordination would fit in for CIMIC engagement? The emphasis going more towards engagement For those of us who are not familiar with the integrated mission concept in the UN, it is probably the best model for what we would call a comprehensive approach on NATO side or interagency coordination on the US side, because it's very operationally focused. It has very clear strategic direction from New York, and it's based on the three components: civilian, military, and police. But it's very clear in the integrated mission concept of civilian primacy of civil authority, which is also in the report very well stressed there. And so, given that model, where would this emerging civic engagement concept fit in? And particularly with regard to two other things: transition management and community engagement. In other words, transition from peacekeeping, building, for example. And you know, while the U.S., for example, struggles mightily to actually have civilian and military actors working together as teams on the ground, such as in Syria, this is more or less routine in mission. So I wondered if you could elaborate on that for the greater learning of particularly the civil affairs community.
Thanks, Chris. That's an easy one for me. I'm going to read from, page 17 of the infantry manual that talks about engagement platoons and what the concept of engagement is. All UN infantry battalion engagement tasks should be coordinated with the sector and force in accordance with mission priorities and directive, utilizing mission designated liaison processes. So what we did there was we said that this is a part of a mission-wide effort to do engagement. It is not done in a vacuum. As a matter of fact, we're encouraging infantry battalion commanders to be very cautious to ensure that whatever tasks are being undertaken by their engagement teams are fully nested within not only the force, but the mission priorities and processes that have been determined for the specific mission. And it's very different from one mission to the other. How it is done in the Central African Republic does not look at all like it does in the Kashmir or Cyprus or Colombia. They're very different models with different structures that they support. But we are utilizing the same coordination process. And as you said, in order to be able to do this, it has to be done through the Joint Operations Center. It has to be done in concert with UN police, UN civilian support, and other actors, as well as national actors in some missions. So it's baked into the process that it is truly a combined and joint operation. Hopefully that answers the question.
It certainly does from my perspective, and I think again one of the things that is undervalued is how this particular model and how it's been defined since it was introduced in the early 2000s as a result of the Brahimi report. An exceptional model that not only works off of very clear principles, but is highly adaptive to the mission requirements. Some of those missions have a greater protection mandate. Some of them actually have a stabilization mandate, etc. So this idea of working along the full spectrum, it's very adaptive, and I would commend anyone who's looking at this nettlesome problem of how to get civilians and other actors, civilians, military and police in this case, and UN missions, but also other organizations. The wider UN country team concept. It's really very instructive.
So Chris, if I can also add in here, the engagement platoons are part of an infantry battalion. We don't find them in missions that don't have infantry units. So currently there's no expectation to create this as a standalone capability. What we do have are CIMIC/engagement sections of headquarters in other missions that have the same kind of responsibilities, but they do it from their, essentially from their staff section that's responsible for doing this. So 2 different models. Large missions that have infantry battalions have these engagement platoons. Small missions that don't have infantry have a different mandate, will only utilize the staff capability, which will have some operational outreach as well. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. And just any references you got on that you can post on the chat line, that would be wonderful. I think a lot of people would be very interested in looking at it. Just to clarify, a question actually brought up yesterday, ears were ringing, I'm sure at the time, was this idea of the engagement platoon is not necessarily that the personnel, particularly the female personnel in the platoon, are not necessarily repurposed infantry soldiers. They could be, for example, it's kind of like embedding a civil affairs team or in a or a CIMIC team in a line unit. So could you explain exactly what the UN is telling the troop contributing countries as to how they would man these? That they're not asking to necessarily repurpose infantry soldiers, but to kind of plug these people in, kind of like special ops teams.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So the language in the infantry manual specifically addresses this, and it says that these individuals can be of a variety of different military skills. They can be of a variety of ranks, although it has to fit within the command and control structure of that infantry battalion. And it is a separate unit that is part of the support company. So it then attaches engagement teams out to the companies as they do their basic infantry tasks. So the expectation we left this as wide open as we could, understanding that our member states, many simply don't have women in the infantry military skill. So this allows them to fill these platoons from any available military skill. That being said, it's still on us to provide the requisite training and equipping guidance that needs to finalize this process. So our intent is to create engagement platoon training courses, and then we already have put into the statements of unit requirements for infantry units what the equipment looks like for these platoons. So we're partway there, but it's really important that we write the engagement platoon handbook, because that will give us the tasks and the standards against which we can produce a training program. So regardless of where these individuals come from, they will have to go through that training. Our intent is that the member states will do the training on their own, but they will do it in accordance with UN training standards. And then it will just become part of what we evaluate either in pre-deployment or in post-deployment. Hopefully that helps.
Very much so. Okay, let's move on now. I can see that Kyle has got Dr. John Black up. And Dr. Black, if you would please forward your question to Lieutenant Colonel Allen.
Yeah, first of all, thank you to everybody. Colonel Allen, this was something you spoke to, Major General Van Roosen. Good to see you again, sir. And I think this also speaks to something all the members have spoken to. My background is CA, PSYOP, etc., but I'm an academic researcher in the area of decision making and sense making. So, Colonel Allen, you were speaking to this complexity, this outreach, and the way we engage. And the fact is, we're dealing with complex systems. And it was also brought out about the idea of second order effects and everything else. So and in fact, General Van Roosen, sir, you just spoke to the idea of the training that's being done. My question is, in the academic world and the business world, we have things like sense making for handling complex adaptive systems. We have complexity environments. We have all these other things that I think civil affairs has always known. We've always seen our ripple effects. We've always recognized that the influence isn't only the moment or only getting the 25-meter target or anything else. It's where are we going to be 5 years from now from an action we do today? How did we get here from an action that occurred 5 years from now? And how do we honor that in the society that we're operating in? And how do we deal with this? Well, there's a lot of work that's been done in this in the decision-making space and the sense-making space in business and academia and everything else, but I've yet to see it really potentially adopted or brought into into the training space of civil affairs, yet we do it almost intuitively. So my question, sir, to you, since you spoke to it first, was this idea of engagement outreach is, has these things like sense making, these other things, been talked about, adopted, researched? And to the rest of the people on the panel, just your thoughts about how we sort of codify the way we look at the world differently in a way that could be recognized potentially outside of our space.
Yeah, John, thanks for that. It's really good sort of summary of where we are with dealing with the complexity of it. And I would say, there is quite a lot of UK doctrine where we've looked to the understanding, and this isn't just like an enemy focused exercise where we talk about identifying a sort of physical network. It's recognizing it more as a sort of an ecosystem that actually changes and mutates as you interact with it, and certainly building our understanding of that we're not looking at something from the outside as a passive observer, we're inside it, and it changes as we do things, has become more important. That's why we've got outreach is actually a tactical function in our doctrine. So it's not just something that's a certain subject matter experts deal with. It is how you build up your operation. So outreach is as equal a tactical function as fires, as maneuver, as information activity, as sustainment, as command and control. And some operations, the skill in orchestrating operations is deciding how much, is more time spent on outreach early a good investment so that you don't have to spend a lot of time on fires later. So this is where the idea of the sort of campaigning mindset, that actually you're not going to sort of solve this in 6 months, and it's to get to the idea that actually you are constantly rebalancing between it. So outreach it's not just something that our civil affairs outreach guys do. Everybody does it, whether they mean to or not, and it's sometimes getting them to understand it. So I would say if we had the master principle, the sort of the one ring to bind them all, it would actually be understand the context, and actually the fact that it's a living context you go into. It's not a static organization chart that as soon as you engage with it stays the same. You change it. So it's a constant thing that you have to do. So that's why we promoted essentially outreach is a tactical function, and that's cross-government as well. So we have integrated action in the UK parlance. That means not just defence, that's whole of government. And our tactical orchestration is the balance between how much fires, how much manoeuvre, how much information activity, how much outreach do we do, and educating and training people to do that is complex. And we've got a lot of research from our sort of science and technology side that's looking at the understanding, the nature of decision making, how we affect partners, the nature of partner relationships. And it's dealing with an ecosystem rather than a fixed solid network. I think that's the change in our understanding. And we're having to look at innovative ways at how you get people to think in that space. But the key thing is it's not just the specialists. The specialists can advise other people how to do it. Everybody has a role to do in it, whether they like it or not. They do have a role in outreach. Sometimes it's quite a negative role in outreach if they don't understand what that is. I don't know whether that helps.
Chris, if I can also partly answer Dr. Black's question. Good to see you again. The academic aspect of developing training is a good question. You know, we have thankfully partnership with a really good number of UN training centers that are hosted and run in our member states, from China and Mongolia to Argentina to Canada to you name it. We have these UN training centers around the world. So developing the training itself will be taken in part from existing CIMIC and civil affairs where we can. However, the model for the UN is slightly different, and Chris alluded to that a couple of times. We do indeed have built into our processes, it is not just a military-centric action. Ours are done in coordination with police and civilian and wider actors. It's just built into our process. So as we write this this new training material based on the CIMIC engagement handbook, it will be by its very nature already widely coordinated in our missions. Hopefully that helps.
Okay, great. So I think Dr. Lucy Wallet is up next, and please, as succinctly as you can, state your question. I believe that is also for Colonel Allen. Colonel Allen, you're quite on the spot today. Gotta unmute, yeah.
Okay, am I unmuted? Yes.
Yes, you are.
Great.
Yes, you are.
Good morning. I truly enjoyed hearing Lieutenant Colonel Allen's presentation. I am a researcher at the Engineer Research and Construction Center in Champaign, Illinois. It's a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers research laboratory. And I've been working for many years on the integration of sociocultural analysis into situational understanding. But our latest project has to do with developing a framework for how to determine vulnerability to what on the side of the operational environment, and could be applicable to understanding disaster kinds of things. So anyway, what we're focusing on in the vulnerability operational side is influence of the adversary on the civilian population. How do you determine that? What do you look for? What do you recognize? And how do you determine the root causes? Because this is the kind of understanding that we believe is needed for planners, that critical understanding of context, but understanding of what's really relevant in that context to know how to deal with the influence of the adversary. And it could be behavioral influence, it could be ideological, whatever. So anyway, I'm wondering if the UK has doctrine or documents that we can share, that they can share with us, that explains this approach, this integrated operating approach that includes civil military engagement.
I mean, certainly this sort of the overall concept of the integrated operating concept is publicly available, and the link is I've sent to Chris. Is in terms of sort of the doctrine we've developed on outreach and the outreach handbook, is at the moment that's very much evolving, because what we've realised is actually we've learned a lot from the sort of the last 20 years of operations in terms of the sort of counter VEO operations and sort of network understanding, and it's almost the temptation can be to almost go throw that away and then go back to the formal J2 analysis. But I think we've realised actually there was some really good concepts and ideas that were picked up, and a lot of this was done almost in a slightly ad hoc way that people built from experience. So we've made a real effort to try and capture people's good experience in our sort of revised outreach doctrine, which at the moment is out there being used for essentially experimentation. So we've produced experimental doctrine that we're using on exercise and we're using on operations to try and shape what's really useful. But we're also pursuing sort of other innovative ways, and which is in fact is the next panel after this that we'll talk on is the human domain matrix. But it's about getting to that. How do you identify the fractures, the fissures in societies that are potentially vulnerable, which I think is exactly the sort of area you're looking at. And of course, that's particularly relevant to counter hybrid warfare, and certainly a lot of our partners on the MCDC counter hybrid warfare project. They're quite far ahead on that, so we're drawing some of their information as well. But I can certainly send you some of the stuff that we've got. I would say a lot of it is still experimental, but I think it's always going to be that way, because essentially to get that level of understanding is very difficult to get that. And in the days of the sort of the British Empire and the government agent on the northwest frontier, they lived up there for 30 years and they spoke 20 languages. We just haven't got those sort of people anymore, so we're having to look at gaining that understanding somehow in other ways. But the big data will only take you so far, and it's how you get the thick data, the real depth of understanding, and that's certainly definitely an area of research and interest that we have as well, because actually if you can get to the root cause of things, you can prevent escalation. And that's what we're aiming for, is to try and keep this below the level of armed conflict. We don't want to inadvertently escalate, and unfortunately in the past, that's what's happened. We've inadvertently escalated. It's one thing to deliberately do it, but it's when you inadvertently do it, it's almost unexcusable. So I think it's a critical area that we do have to invest in, and it's good to hear that you're looking at that area as well.
Okay, Major Hancock.
Thank you very much for the outstanding presentation today, team. I've been taking notes furiously, really appreciate it. At my level of the battlefield, I'm involved in the nuts and bolts of making this all happen. I was very interested, Major Nato, about your statement on the new CIMIC DART hybrid team that you're running. And you mentioned one of the primary missions of this new team is to produce a detailed view of the civil environment. My question for you and your boss there is, what platforms are you using, one, to collect the data that you use for that, two, to analyze that data in a meaningful way, and three, to present that data to decision makers? Over.
Thank you very much, Brian, for this question. I'm afraid that my answer will be a bit deceiving. We have used in the past Canadian database management tools such as Orion back in the Afghan days. At the present time, there's a few, small scale initiatives. We're working on different, Excel sheet, all ad hoc tools that we're trying to develop. It's certainly something that we're looking at it right now to come up with a more harmonized, formalized way to gather data. There's clearly a need for that. We're also trying to find ways to gather all kinds of other kind of data. I mentioned during the brief, social media, atmospheric data as well. So very much looking to a mix of internal and perhaps off-the-shelf solution for that. But for now, it's still very much on the drawing table.
Thank you.
Okay, to Colonel Garcia, out in Fort Shafter, Hawaii. Aloha to Hawaii, and I believe that might be our last question.
Hello, good morning. Aloha. Thanks, team, for all the great information. My question is for the the influence activities and the task force specifically, with the information, the passive information or the atmospherics that the task force receives. Is that information processed and analyzed from within the task force, or is it outsourced to an intelligence unit for analyzing, processing in order to identify future targets, so forth and so on? Thank you.
First of all, I really wish, am I on? Yes, okay. Je suis pas muté? No, okay. Okay, I wish I was answering that where you are right now, not in Kingston on a rainy day. So first, IETF is a force generating unit. So normally we don't, I give my people away to deploy, but usually we're not doing that, but we're creating a reach back capability, which is very limited for now. But when that reach back is on with analysis, a little bit of analysis and production, we gain access, direct liaison with the Canadian Joint Operation Command. So that's how in Canada it's made. As for on operations, the way the intelligence, well, it becomes intelligence because we don't do intelligence, we just collect information. The way what the product of our analysis does, it informs the actions of CIMIC, and so the products of PSYOPs and the actions of CIMIC. So that's the main purpose of the analysis. But this still becomes intelligence in the sense that we have an analyst who is co-located with the all source intelligence cell. So that's where it's being fused. And like anybody else, like infantry, patrol, etc., when people go on patrol, their reports are going both to an analyst, and they're also being sent to higher headquarters. And from that direction, they also go into what we call the ASIC, the all source intelligence cell. So yeah, I think that answers your question. I hope.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, yeah.
Chris, you need to unmute.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted. You click and sometimes it doesn't happen. So let me just wrap up here then. And I was in the middle of thanking everyone from General Van Roosen to Dave Allen and Stefan and Carolyn and Charles for providing these highly interesting insights. I think this is really what I'm hoping for here is to galvanize this kind of discussion and regularize it every year, if not every semi-year, in the association's meetings. The other one in the spring is called Roundtable. We hope to be live, by the way, and coincided with the U.S. Army Peacekeeping and Stability Operations Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, and their annual Peace and Stability Operations Training and Innovation Workshop, otherwise known as PSOTU. So that's coming in the future. But I certainly want to, I certainly fully support the creation of what we can call an expanded learning organization, which we desperately need across all the ponds and from all the corners of the world, because these threats that we're dealing with are very sophisticated and extremely comprehensive, well beyond our singular capabilities to deal with. So with that, I just want to point out a couple things on the, we have the Eunomia Journal. I have invited everybody here to post an article there summarizing their presentations, and that will be widely shared. For those of you who are listening, please go to the association website. You can certainly sign up to get all of the updates, but you can read a lot of the things that have already been posted in the Eunomia Journal and across the website. Also check out the 1CA podcasts. If you're interested, by the way, again, General Van Roosen, I am targeting you specifically to come to and be on one of our podcasts, as well as the CCOE, as well as our friends in Kingston, which is right across from my state in New York, and as well as Dave. And please feel free to join in on our conversation platforms. And for those of you, again, who've not checked out the website, please do sign up to get the email updates, so you get that sent to you when a new article is published or something's being discussed. We also have social media platforms on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And consider joining. It's not much money, and you get a whole lot of bang for the buck. So consider that. Members can be members of the association, even if you're not civil affairs. In fact, we want to extend that invitation specifically to our allies and partners. So with that, thank you again, all of you, for your service in your various corners of the world. Highly appreciated from this corner of the world, and we wish you all the very best of luck, and please stay safe. Everyone, please stay safe and stay engaged, because there's a lot of work to do. Out here.